טוב, אנחנו שמחים לחזור למושב האחרון. המושב האחרון, מושב רביעי, בנושאים של גיאוגרפיה היסטורית וארכיאולוגיה של הר אפרים וסביבתו. את המושב ינהל פרופסור זאב ספראי, ששמענו ממש לפני רגע במושב הקודם מבר אילן. יש לנו 6 הרצאות, חלקם בזום, ואני מעביר לזאב את השרביט.
שלום, אחרי צהריים טובים. אני פותח בזה את המושב הרביעי של הכנס, ואני רוצה להזמין את דוקטור קריס מקיני. דוקטור מקיני למד אצלנו בבר אילן, ומתמחה בגיאוגרפיה היסטורית ובשילוב של ארכיאולוגיה ומקרא, פרסם ערכים רבים באנציקלופדיות וספרי מקרא, השתתף בחפירות תל אל צפי, ערך סקר מקיף בתל קריית יערים, ומשמש כאיש צוות בכיר בחפירות תל בורנה. כיום הוא משמש כיועץ מדעי של חברת גשר מדיה, אין לי מושג מהי. אני מודע קריס ירצה בזום, אני מקווה שהפירוטכניקה תעבוד. We welcome Chris McKinney, who studied in Bar Ilan University and specialized in historical geography, combined with archaeology and text, the Bible. He published many articles, participate in the excavation in Tel El Safi, conducted a survey at Tel Kiryat Yarim, and participate in Chafirot Burna, and now he is academic advisor to the company of Gesher Media that I don't know anything about it. Dr. Chris, please.
Thank you, Professor Safrai, and good morning from South Texas.
Chris, we don't hear you.
You don't hear me? No? Okay. My mic is on.
We do hear you.
You do hear me, okay.
From home, but maybe not from the room.
Okay, they say they hear me, Aaron. Can everybody hear me okay?
I hear you well from home, but I don't know about the others in the room. Maybe it's a specific issue in the room.
Okay.
It's Chris, please.
I can go? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the title of this paper is The Dust of the Earth and the Promises to Abram and Jacob as an allusion to the town of Ophrah. Abram and Jacob, according to the book of Genesis, each visited the Bethel region on 2 separate occasions. On 3 of these visits, Yahweh reaffirmed his promise of land and descendants to them. One element of God's promise to all the patriarchs was that they would be given innumerable offspring. Let's see. Several metaphors were employed to demonstrate the unquantifiability of the nature of their descendants, including the dust of the earth, the stars of heaven, and the sand on the seashore. In this paper, I will demonstrate that the dust of the earth metaphor, which is used only in the region of Bethel, had a geographical pun that has not been observed by commentators. God's promise to provide descendants to the elderly and infertile couple of Abraham and Sarah is one of the central themes of the Abrahamic cycle. During the course of the narrative, Abraham was promised by God on 5 separate occasions that he would have a son who would have innumerable offspring. Most of these promises include a simile or similes that illustrate the unquantifiability of his descendants. These similes include Abraham's descendants being described like the dust of the earth, and the promise given near Bethel, like the stars of heaven at Mamre and at Mount Moriah, as well as like the sand on the seashore at Mount Moriah. Isaac's much shorter narratives include Yahweh reaffirming his promise to Isaac on two separate occasions in the context of Isaac's conflicts with Abimelech in the southwest coastal plain and in the Negev. In the first reaffirmation, God used the single simile, the stars of heaven, employed earlier with Abraham to indicate that the promises was still in effect. For Jacob, the reaffirmation of Yahweh's covenant with Abraham revolves around Jacob's two visits to Bethel. On the first visit, Jacob visited the vicinity of Bethel on his way from Beersheba to Padan Haram. Here, he was told that his descendants would be like the dust of the earth. In a later reflection of this visit at Mahanaim, Jacob recounted that God promised him that his descendants would be like the sand of the sea. Later biblical references refer to these different similes. We see, for instance, the stars of heaven and the sand on the seashore occurring frequently in later biblical passages that reflect on the fulfillment of the covenant that Israel would have innumerable descendants. In contrast, the dust of the earth simile occurs a single time in later biblical text, appearing only in the chronicler's version of Solomon's initial visit to Gibeon. It is clear that the dust of the earth simile was not the preferred method of referring back to the Abrahamic covenant in later biblical literature, as it is used only a single time out of the 11 references that point back to the promise. This is despite the fact that these similes are used with almost equal frequency in Genesis. And in fact, each of these are universal symbols that convey quantifiable amounts. So we might ask the question, let's go back here. Why did the later biblical writers prefer stars and sand over dust? I believe the answer to this question has to do with the particular geographical setting in Genesis 13 and 18, the location where Abram and Jacob received a promise from Yahweh. Perhaps the dust of the earth is actually a geographical pun referring to Ophrah. Ophrah is a biblical town near Bethel that is universally identified with Et Taibeh. It is located less than 4 miles or 6 kilometers to the northeast of Beitin and just south of and below Baal Hatzor or Jebel Assur. Jebel Assur is the highest location in the Central Highlands, rising to over 1,000 meters, which is about 800 feet or 240 meters higher than Jerusalem. Before continuing further with this suggestion, let us briefly examine the two passages in which the dust of the earth are referenced. The first of these says, Yahweh said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. This is Genesis 13. Second passage, and he, this is Jacob, dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. It is striking that both of these passages deal with the allotment of territory to Abram and his descendants. In Genesis 13, there is a clear division of land between Lot's chosen eastern allotment and Abraham's remaining allotment in Canaan proper. This is indicated by the cardinal points of direction, as well as Yahweh's command to Abram to walk through the length and the breadth of the land. Just real briefly here, in light of the recent publication by Nature on Tel Al-Hammam and the so-called airburst event. One of the things that is often missed in this is, in my opinion, that it's impossible that Sodom can be located to the north of the Dead Sea. And one of the compelling reasons why is from this very passage, where we see the high place of of the area of either Baal Hatzor or perhaps outside of Bethel, which can see both down towards the southern end of the Dead Sea, as well as the northern end of the Dead Sea. And this can be confirmed by line of sight imagery, which points to either one of these locations, Ramat Hatzor, Baal Hatzor, or EP 914, where I have direct line of sight down to the southern end of the basin. But there's much more we could say about that, but we'll leave it for now. In addition, Jacob's return visit to Bethel was followed by the death of Rachel, who died giving birth to Benjamin within the to be allotted territory of Benjamin. In my view, this event clearly prefigures the association of Benjamin within this region. My computer's frozen. Hold on, sorry. Here you can see a map from Bethel going down and the likely location of the tomb of Rachel, which I believe is at Kuber B'nai Israel. Finally, the standing stone pillar of Bethel might also allude to the later geographical boundary between Ephraim and Benjamin, as similar to the standing stone arrangement marking the covenant boundary between Laban and Jacob in Gilead. Interpreting the Bethel theophanies as geographically significant is actually attested in Jewish traditions from the Second Temple period. The Genesis Apocryphon of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a first century pseudepigraphic midrash on the events of the book of Genesis, with the characters of Lamech, Noah, and Abraham serving as the main narrators. In column 21, which is an expansion on Genesis 13, we read as follows, with Abram standing on top of Ramat Hatzor. He bought a house for himself in Sodom and dwelt in there. I was dwelling in the hill country of Bethel. It was distressful to me that Lot, the son of my brother, had separated from me. Then God appeared to me in a night vision and said to me, go up to Ramat Hatzor, which is to the north of Bethel, the place where you dwell, and lift up your eyes and look to the east and to the west and to the south and to the north, and look at all this land which I am giving to you and to your descendants, all the ages. So the following day I went up to Ramat Hatzor, and I viewed the land from this high place, from the river of Egypt to Lebanon and Sinir, and from the great sea to the Haran, and all the land of Gabal up to Kadesh, and the whole of the great desert, which is east of the Haran and Sinir as far as the Euphrates. And he said to me, to your descendants I will give all of this land, and they will have a possession for it for all ages. I will multiply your descendants to be like the dust of the ground, which no person is able to count. Now, clearly the writer of the Apocryphon focused on the maximal limits and really beyond. It goes well around and encompasses a huge area of what Abram could have seen from the top of Baal Hatzor. Ironically, though, the reference to the dust might refer to a location, Ophrah, that was in the immediate proximity to Baal Hatzor. From a tribal allotment perspective, Ophrah was a town situated on the border between Ephraim and Benjamin that was allotted to Benjamin. Scholars remain divided over whether the seemingly Ephraimite towns of Zemaraim, Bethel, Avim, which is probably Ophrah, and others actually fell within the northern boundary of Benjamin, or if the Benjaminite towns reflect a later period of the monarchy. We should also note Aaron Tovger's intriguing suggestion to connect elevation point 914, the second highest hill in the region, with the cult site of Bethel, and perhaps the location of Abram's altar. Ophrah also figures in two other biblical accounts: the Philistine invasion against Saul at Michmash and Geba, and the conflict between Abiah and Jeroboam on Mount Zeramaim. In the later passage, Abiah successfully defeated Jeroboam and took Bethel, Jeshanah, and Ephron, which is normally understood to be an alternative form of Ephron. The geographical and textual background of Ophrah as a border settlement near Bethel seems consistent with the suggestion offered here that Ophrah is implied in Genesis 13 and 28, which likewise refer to the allotment of the region to Abram and Jacob. Given this context, the dust simile in the promises made to Abram and Jacob seems to be implying that their descendants would be blown as dust over the entire landscape of Canaan, a fitting image given the expansive vistas offered either by Baal Hatzor or EP 914 that were perhaps inspired by the nearby town of Ophrah. While Ophrah does not appear elsewhere in Genesis, overlooked geographical puns or word plays may be present in biblical texts, particularly when the geographical context is considered. Another example of an overlooked possible geographical pun may be found in 1 Kings 19, 4 and 5. In this passage, it reads, "But he, Elijah himself, went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. 'It is enough now, Yahweh, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors.' Then he lay down under a broom tree and fell asleep." Now, the word obviously for broom tree is rotum. This event can be compared to Numbers 33, where we have the reference to Ritma, which is the location of an encampment near Kadesh Barnea, and is perhaps preserved at Wadi Abu Rutimet. Thus, it seems possible to understand that the writer of 1 Kings 19 is using a geographical pun that would alert readers that Elijah was given divinely provided food and drink at the location where his fathers received it. There are several other biblical toponyms based on the root Afar. While other place names sound similar enough that they could be used in puns or word plays in biblical literature. The most obvious example can be found in Micah's pun-filled lament in Micah 1, 10 through 16, which mourns the destruction of a number of Judahite towns in the Shephelah in connection with Sennacherib's campaign in 701 BC. The lament begins with a reference to the former Philistine city of Gath, now a Judahite town. "Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all." This is followed by the enigmatic town of Beit La-Afra, where you are to roll yourselves in the dust. Regardless of the exact identification of this town, it is clear that the toponym Beit La-Afra is used in a negative wordplay, connected with the practice of covering oneself with earth or dust. Micah also probably employs Afar as a description of the relatively insignificance of Migdal Eder in Micah 4:8, as indicated by the Septuagint. On the basis of the Septuagint, the MTs, or the Masoretic texts, Ophal, can probably be amended to Afar, which should be translated adjectively to dusty Migdal Eder. This is important because it would mean that the dusty Migdal Eder, to which the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem, according to Micah 4:8, prefigures the much more well-known passage in Micah 5:2. In my view, Migdal Eder in this section should be understood as a nearby settlement to Bethlehem and not Jerusalem itself. And the section of Micah 4:8 through 5:6 should be taken together with it as referring to the future birth of the Davidic Messiah out of Bethlehem. Epher, going in a very different part of geography, was one of the sons of Keturah, the concubine of Abraham, along with the similar sounding Ephah. Epher may be understood as reflecting the dusty nature of the living conditions of Midianite tribes in northern Arabia. However, it also seems quite possible that the name could reflect the physical qualities of incense powder, which was obviously the forte of the Midianites and their southern neighbors of Sheba. Epher and Ephah are usually identified in close proximity to one another in the Midianite heartland, close to Al-Bada. On at least one occasion, the South Arabian gold source of Ophir is mentioned alongside the similar sounding Afar. It is noteworthy that Ophir is paired together with Havilah in the Table of Nations. Havilah is likely based on the Hebrew word for sand. Thus, in this passage, these two sons of the South Arabian Joktan, who's a son of Eber also, can be characterized as sandy and sounds like dusty. These examples point to the fact that Afar can be used in a variety of ways to describe a toponym. In this paper, we briefly examine the three similes used in Genesis to describe the innumerable offspring that Yahweh promised to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. In all three instances, the dust of the earth, the stars of the heaven, and the sand on the seashore. These can be understood as general symbols for unquantifiable amounts. Clearly, the main point of this aspect of the promise in its various iterations is that the patriarchs will have countless descendants. However, I have argued that unlike the stars of the heaven and the sand on the seashore, the dust of the earth may have a particular geographic and textual background due to the location of the narrative in the vicinity of Bethel. I have suggested that Afar in the simile, your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, alludes to the nearby settlement of Ophrah, which is located at Taibe. This viewpoint is particularly striking in Genesis 13, as Baal Hatzor may be understood as the setting for Abram's view of the land as interpreted in the Genesis Apocryphon. Ophrah was a later tribal and national border settlement, which is also perhaps reflected in Jacob erecting standing stones at Bethel. Therefore, it is logical that Ophrah would be alluded to in the simile, and perhaps was the inspiration for this particular metaphor. Thank you.